Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Cooperstown, New York, even a bit of DC. The sights, the culture, the food, well, mostly the food. Was Philadelphia sunny? Did we encounter any chuds? And why did we not have steamed hams? All this plus Trevor Gumble on our 10-day trip through the East Coast. Honestly, I don't get the bad rep that Spirit Airlines gets. It's just an airline. You pay for your ticket, pay separately for the luggage, you board the plane, you take your seat, put on your seatbelt and fly. And arrive. That's it. That's all it is. See? That wasn't so bad, was it? After picking up my newfangled jalopy from Enterprise, I drive my way out of the airport and into Pittsburgh, one of the largest cities in the country with no mainline interstates, one interstate loop that's not a loop, and one interstate spur that's not a spur. If you ever want to feel what Lando Calrissian felt when he flew that Millennium Falcon out of the exploding second Death Star, driving the Fort Hood Tunnel is as close to that feeling as you will ever get. My first stop was the neighborhood of Oakland and a Primanti Brothers restaurant. It's less of a restaurant and more of a local institution. Their claim to fame? French fries inside the sandwich. It's not bad. I actually kind of liked it. But I think the California burrito would run circles around it. Walk of the sandwich and the cider, I wander into the University of Pittsburgh, where I stumble upon the Cathedral of Learning, a 42-story late Gothic Revival building that is the largest educational building in the Western Hemisphere. Right across the street are the Carnegie Museums, and in particular the Carnegie Museum of Art. The brainchild of steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, this museum hosts European, American, and Japanese fine art from the 17th century to the present, as well as rotating exhibitions of modern art. Oh, look at that! A view of the Monongahela River from Mount Washington. I make my way through the local hilltop neighborhood because I have nothing better to do, and patronize the local ice cream establishment before taking a ride on the Monongahela Incline. Opened in 1870, it is the oldest continuously operating funicular in the United States. But enough of that. Time to drive the Roberto Clemente Bridge, named after the late great Hall of Fame right fielder for the Pittsburgh Pirates. One of the three so-called sister bridges alongside the Andy Warhol and Rachel Carson bridges. Finally, I made my way to PNC Park, the house that Andrew McCutcheon built. Opened in 2001, the stadium offers some of the most stunning views of the Pittsburgh skyline, especially at night. At the stadium, I ate pierogi for the first time, a staple of Pittsburgh cuisine, and also took in a fireworks show to cap off the night. Alas, Baltimore beckons, and so after a brief night stay in Somerset, I barreled down the Pennsylvania Turnpike to get to my destination quickly. Of course, this required driving through Breezewood, one of the very few places in the country where an interstate runs at street level, all on the pretext of local economic security. After that bit of unpleasantness, I crossed into Maryland and followed the cross-country Interstate 70 to its abortive and unassuming end at a Baltimore park-and-ride lot. Soon I made my way through the city to reach Oriole Park at Camden Yards, home of the Baltimore Orioles. Opened in 1992 to replace Memorial Stadium, Oriole Park is the first of the retro Major League ballparks constructed during the 1990s and early 2000s, and is consistently hailed as one of the best ballparks in the country. In this stadium in 1995, Orioles Hall of Fame shortstop Cal Ripken Jr. broke Lou Gehrig's record of 2,130 consecutive games played. It was in Oriole Park where I ate my first crab cake sandwich, the most Baltimore thing you can eat in Baltimore.
Whenever you're ready, it's your pitch. We thank Brendan for joining us today, and we hope he has a wonderful afternoon at the ball.
And as day became night, it was time to make my way to the airport and pick up some company.
Hello.
Hello.
How was your flight?
Bumpy. But that baggage took forever.
That's just regular flying for you.
I thought they had lost it. It's like one of the last bags to get.
Full control, air travel.
At least the flight was only an hour. Ready?
Ready.
With Trevor joining the RPG party, and after a night's rest, we drove towards Philadelphia, the city where people pronounce water as wooder and towel as towel. In the back of my mind, I hoped I would catch a sight of Gritty, the unsettling orange creature who supports the Flyers, or others of his species in their natural habitat. Instead, we settled for a brief visit to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which we did not partake because of the 2-hour parking limitation. So as an alternative, I opted for the obligatory Rocky Balboa pose.
You're gonna take a picture.
Do I push the button again?
No, just it should be running right now. You're gonna take it from that side.
I do now.
After our abject failure in finding parking, we agreed to brave through Philly's narrow streets for a side quest. Pat's King of Steaks, birthplace of the Philly cheesesteak sandwich and a local culinary institution for over 90 years. Thereafter, it was time to watch the Phillies play at Citizens Bank Park, where Philadelphians congregate to witness the Philly fanatic and absorb his life-affirming teachings. Say, didn't the Daughters of the Titan Atlas trash this place in the documentary Shazam! Fury of the Gods? Good thing they rebuilt it before he got here, otherwise this whole trip would have been for nothing. I wonder if Pedro was watching the game from the rafters. I ask because I didn't check. With the Phillies win, it was time to claw our way out of Philadelphia for a night's stay in Scranton. Deep in the heart of the New York countryside lies a place of legends and myths, where heroes of a bygone era are enshrined and their exploits are passed down to the new generations. Welcome to Cooperstown, home of the national pastime. There, we stepped into the hallowed grounds of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Founded by Stephen Carlton Clark, an heir to the singer's sewing machine fortune, the museum opened in 1939.
Wave it. That's terrible. Oh, come on. Actually, that's not bad. Your arm's in the way. Looks like it's coming out of your head. Okay. Pull up. Okay, that's better. I don't know. Bleeding blue. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, so we have Newman Parada, Benny P., Los Angeles Dodgers, considered by many to be the greatest slugger in the history and one of the baseball's most awkward stars, holder of many records including most jumping jacks in a career and greatest number of selfies in a single season, which is ironic because the real Newman doesn't take selfies. He's a very shy one, isn't he? Yep.
Hall of Fame inductees have a plaque installed in the plaque gallery, the crown jewel of the complex. A mix of players, umpires, managers, and executives from the earliest days of the game to the present form the current body of inductees. Yay, Sandy Koufax! Also, Tommy Lasorda, baseball ambassador. Cooperstown was chosen as the site of the complex, partly to sustain local tourism devastated by Prohibition and later by the Great Depression, and also partly because of the apocryphal yarn that Civil War hero Abner Doubleday invented baseball here. The museum houses memorabilia, permanent and rotating exhibits, an interactive area for the kids, the scribes and mic men area where baseball writers and broadcasters are honored, and an art gallery. Even some of the most famous fans are commemorated here, including Howlin' Hilda Chester, a champion for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Hilda is here indeed. Scott Rowland and Fred McGriff were the most recent inductees at the time of our visit and were also honored with their own exhibits.
Actually looks decent.
It's a very good picture. Alright, let's see.
You know, a baseball hero.
With our baseball souls made pure, we headed out and made a brief stop at the Cooperstown Cheese Company to dispose ourselves of local cheese offerings. After that, we dashed to Oneonta and the Depot restaurant, where we shared slices of Detroit-style pizza with Joe Wade and Libby Cudmore of the OST Party Podcast. Unfortunately, our meeting was too brief, for I had to turn in the car rental at JFK by midnight, so Trevor and I furiously scrammed out of upstate New York, completely ignoring the fact that we drove by Campo and missing our chance to roast Stay Puft marshmallows. It was during the drive through the dense forest of the Palisades Parkway where a wild George Washington Bridge appeared. The double-deck suspension bridge opened in 1931 and was briefly the longest suspension bridge in the world until the Golden Gate Bridge took that distinction when it opened in 1937. The bridge spans the Hudson River, itself named after English explorer Henry Hudson, who embarked on numerous expeditions to find the fabled Northwest Passage, until 1611 when his crew mutinied and cast Hudson, his son, and 6 others adrift at James Bay in nowadays Canada, never to be seen again. Oh well. Welcoming us into New York City was the Cross Bronx Expressway, a fascinating, mysterious, and ever-congested complex of tunnels, ramps, lights, and grime with buildings on top. Remember kids, if you don't have to drive in New York City, don't do it. After sleeping through the morning in the city that never sleeps, Trevor and I pushed through a Byzantine mess of a New York subway station, J Street Metrotech to be exact, where we boarded the F train towards Coney Island for a taste of its amusements. This was the first time either of us stepped foot on Coney Island, which, truth be told, is a peninsula that extended to the original island with landfill. For generations, Coney Island has been a haven for vacationers, sunbathers, and thrill seekers from New York and beyond. Upon our exit from the station, we approached the corner of Surf and Stillwell, home of Nathan's famous hot dogs since 1916. The pride and joy of Coney Island, this beloved gastronomic institution holds the world-famous hot dog eating contest every 4th of July.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Why are you filming now?
I want to.
As our first feat of daring, we purchased a helping of its kosher-style hot dogs, knowing that in devouring them, we would not be upstaged by eating contest champion Joey Chestnut.
The verdict?
Delicious.
I agree.
You wanted to do Dumbo today? Do we have time?
Probably not.
After this, we only have like an hour maybe?
Yeah.
No one is exactly sure where the name of the original island came from. Some believe it came from the name of a Native American tribe called the Kano, or Konoi, who once inhabited the island. Others suggest it is a distortion of the name of Henry Hudson's second mate, John Coleman. Still others believe it comes from either the Irish or Dutch word for rabbit, to reflect the supposed rabbit population that existed in the area. As the day drew to a close, it was time to say goodbye to Coney Island and return to our hotel, where we ordered in a pizza from somewhere. The following morning, I abandoned my comfort zone and made the walk toward Manhattan via the Brooklyn Bridge. It was going to be a busy day out, having been dead set on cramming as many points of interest as I could. So why not rush through the day with a leisurely stroll on a national landmark, right? Opened in 1883, it was the first fixed crossing of the East River. The bridge is an early example of a steel wire suspension bridge, with neo-Gothic suspension towers and caissons bound by timber reaching the bedrock below the river. Pedestrians walk the upper wooden deck, where folks hawking souvenirs are there to meet them. Passenger cars and bicyclists use the lower deck. As an aside, I drove on the bridge the night we entered New York, so it's nice to express my multimodalism on this historic work of engineering. Once I touched ground on Manhattan Island, I braved the maze of streets to reach the 9/11 Memorial, where the World Trade Center towers formerly stood. Two one-acre pools with the largest man-made waterfalls in the United States comprise the footprints of the Twin Towers. But time insists on being my enemy, so in a vain effort to defeat it, I jumped onto the A train uptown to my next destination, the Cloisters. If there was anything to fear in riding New York's famed and extensive subways, I didn't see it. The trains were clean and comfortable, and rodent commuters were few and far between. The Cloisters is designed in the style of a French monastery. Its four cloisters, that is, its inward plazas, were acquired by sculptor George Gray Bernard in France before 1913 and transported to New York for his collection. Famed financier John D. Rockefeller Jr. eventually purchased the collection and in 1927 began efforts to build both the park and the museum, finally opening in 1938. The museum houses European medieval art and architecture, with a focus on the Romanesque and Gothic periods, capturing typical medieval life. After an infusion of culture, a skip and a hop on the A train and the crosstown bus landed me onto the New York City ferry dock fronting the East River, where I took advantage of one of the best bargains you can have in New York, viewing the breathtaking skylines of both Manhattan and Long Island through a ferry ride for only $4. Drove it, walked it, and sailed underneath it. I felt multimodal that day. As I transfer to the next ferry, let's change tapes so that we can bask in more of that soulless but royalty-free muzak. My second ferry dumped its occupants onto Dumbo, a neighborhood whose acronym stands for Down Under the Manhattan Bridge Overpass, a more dynamic name than its previous name, Gareville. Formerly a hub of industry and warehouses, the area deindustrialized and became a haven for artists who looked for cheap rent. The story goes that residents in the 1970s gave it the name Dumbo as a means to deter redevelopment. Clearly it did not work, since the area was redeveloped anyway and is now an upscale residential and commercial community. The neighborhood houses numerous tech startups, and its increasing affluence has made it one of the most upscale neighborhoods in the city. Here's a shot of the Manhattan Bridge as seen from Washington Street. And the tourists who also had the same mind as me. As I walked back to the hotel, I stumbled upon the Little Pizza Parlor, a gastronomic establishment that offered true New York pizza, and it was as delicious and gooey and lightly crunchy as I imagined it. In New York, we stayed at the Aloft in downtown Brooklyn. My verdict, good enough. As night fell, Trevor and I made our way to the Freedom Tower and the One World Observatory, where we experienced New York from above through its enclosed observation deck.
All right, face the back. We got a show for you on the way up.
Welcome to One World Observatory.
Second floor.
Welcome, welcome. We're going to join the line this way.
Thank you.
No problem.
Dynamic, diverse, and ever-changing, the city and skyline reveal themselves uniquely to each observer. Experience the infinite facets of the city beneath us as you prepare to see forever.
Over there is Brooklyn. And that over there is Midtown Manhattan. The elevator down somehow managed to be even better than the ride up, with a virtual fly-through of the reconstructed neighborhood.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you for visiting One World Observatory.
Concourse level.
Okay.
Whenever I am in Lower Manhattan, it is my obligation to dine at Harry's Italian, which serves some of the finest Italian food I have had away from my family of Italian chefs. Their chicken marsala and tiramisu are truly works of art, and it fills you good for the price you pay. The following day, Trevor and I made our way to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, commemorating the terrorist attacks on the original World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, which destroyed the Twin Towers that once stood here. The museum opened in 2014 and is built immediately underneath the footprint of the original towers and the current memorial pools. The museum houses artifacts of the attacks and preserves some of the original construction elements of the Twin Towers, as well as a photographic memorial of the 2,977 men and women who died in the 2001 attacks, and the 6 who died in the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. After a day of solemnity, we capped off the night by Ubering our way to the famous Cat's Delicatessen, a kosher-style eatery founded in 1888 and remains a draw for locals and tourists near and far for its pastrami on rye. I personally am a Reuben guy, so I ordered that, and oh wow, I did not think I would finish that whole thing. It was huge! For breakfast the next day, the name was Junior's Restaurant and Bakery, a Brooklyn diner with some wicked cheesecakes and what my sister described as some sad eggs Benedict. But hey, a picture of Ebbets Field, former home of the Dodgers. After walking the breakfast stop at Prospect Park, it was time to drop off Trevor at the Moulin Rouge musical, while I headed to the Jewish Museum just off Central Park. I was actually aiming for the Museum of Jewish Heritage at the other end of Manhattan, but that was closed on a Saturday. Next time. Part of the New York Museum Mile, the museum is housed at the landmark Warburg Mansion and prides itself on being at the intersection of Jewish culture and art for people of all backgrounds, so its website says. The important thing is that it's free on the Sabbath, which caught me off guard when I first entered, so if you are in town on a Saturday, come on in and browse around. Its art exhibitions don't shy away from bold interpretations of Jewish heirlooms and fresh takes on the Jewish experience. But don't get it wrong either. Heirlooms from as far back as 4,000 years ago abound and are carefully preserved. In all, The museum houses a collection of nearly 30,000 works of art, Judaica, and antiquities. But time flies. Trevor's show was about to end, so I darted my way to the newly built 2nd Avenue subway, a subway project initially proposed in 1920 to complement rail service on the parallel and overworked Lexington Avenue subway and replace elevated lines on 2nd and 3rd Avenues. After numerous fits and starts over nearly a century, the subway finally opened as an extension of the Q line in 2017, with a further extension starting construction in 2024. Mind you, this was Trevor's first time in Times Square, and New York City for that matter. Okay, so I too am guilty of taking a selfie at Times Square. Arrest me. Now for the coup de grace of this whole trip. Back to the Future the musical at the Winter Garden Theater. The show was solid and we both enjoyed it, though it didn't have any particularly memorable numbers. The cast did a fantastic job and, aside from some necessary changes at the beginning, didn't desecrate the original film. Sadly, our adventure in New York City has come to an end, and with broken hearts we hurried across the East River and through Manhattan to take sight of New York's hallowed neighborhoods one last time. It is at the Moynihan Train Hall where the two of us boarded our train to Washington, D.C. The hall itself used to be a post office before it was refurbished to a dignified train station that gives life to the otherwise dreadful Penn Station it expands upon. Having done the train trip from Boston to New York on my first trip to the East Coast in 2008, this trip completes my venture through Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. We actually didn't do anything in Washington, D.C. on account of the hot and muggy weather, opting to take refuge in the posh and plush Phoenix Park Hotel, just a stone's throw away from Union Station. We dined at the adjacent Irish pub called the Dubliner, where I gobbled down a most delectable shepherd's pie alongside a Guinness. For us, it was also the best hotel in the entire trip, with some of the most comfortable beddings to help us rest and reboot before our flights back home. Goodbye, Washington. We hardly knew you. Hello, Dulles International, whose main terminal was designed by the famed Finnish-American architect Eero Saarinen, who bestowed a motif of graceful flight in his design. The actual boarding terminals are separate from the main hall and must be accessed through a network of subterranean people movers. And as we made our way to the boarding gates, a sinking feeling took hold of us. Our voyage is at an end, and soon we would part towards our everyday monochrome. Perhaps we'll have another adventure, in another land, another opportunity to seek out our Technicolor.
Okay, Trevor.
What?
Video time. Time for your final assessment of the trip. How would you rate this trip on 1 to 10?
Well, I mean, it was a 10 until I tried to talk to Joe Pantoliano, but other than that, it was wonderful. I'll give it a 10, and stop laughing at it.
How was the ambience of the trip?
Oh, lovely. Love New York. Of course, it's dirty and it's, but that's part of its charm, I think. Don't you think? I mean, didn't you enjoy it?
I did.
Yeah. Don't you think it's kind of grittiness is part of its charm?
That is true. The sustenance during your trip.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Any highlights?
The pizza was good, especially from that, what was it called again? The one down from the hotel?
Little pizza parlor?
Little pizza parlor. Well, that's easy to memorize, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cats was good, although I only needed half of the sandwich. But man, oh man, that wait. We must have been, about half an hour before we actually ate?
Yeah.
Longer than that, maybe?
Probably.
Where else did we eat? Oh, Nathan's.
Nathan's.
That was worth the trip alone, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Then we finally went to White Castle together.
We'll have more.
I finally realized that it's really nothing different than the frozen kind. We could just video chat, eat frozen White Castle, and just have the same experience.
The experiences.
The 9/11 museum, very sobering, very emotional. It's a beautiful tribute to the to the resilience of the country. It was, I mean, what did you think?
I thought it was excellent.
Yeah.
Very touching, very moving.
We were there for about four, almost 5 hours.
Almost 5 hours.
Yeah. It was something you couldn't just walk through.
That's true.
You had to kind of embrace it. The
Freedom Tower.
Yeah, the Freedom Tower. That was awesome. That was gorgeous. The beautiful views. Yeah, the elevator was fun, especially the ride back down.
Yes, highly recommend it.
Yeah, I didn't expect that. Did you?
No, I did not. I knew about the ride up, but not the ride down.
Yeah, but you didn't. Yeah, it was I kind of want to experience that again, if just for that part. That's something I think my mom would like. If we ever went to New York, I'll take her to that. Actually, she might live Back to the Future too.
I think she would.
It's a safe enough and genial enough musical I think she'll enjoy.
How about the conveyances?
The conveyances?
Yes.
You mean
transport?
Oh, you mean subway?
Yes.
Not as scary as the David Fincher films would have you believe. Or horror films.
Or just about any film about New York, especially in the 80s.
Yeah, when they do films about New York, when they do subway shots, it's always very dark and sinister.
Mm.
A lot of walking, you were right. But I think I'm getting used to it. Times Square was everything I wanted it to be. Beautiful.
Mm.
Although next time, we should try to go at night. Or get pictures at night at least.
Yes.
But I still think we got some good shots. Next time I want to go to 30 Rock. Maybe get tickets to SNL if they can.
Yeah, we could try.
Yeah, I know. I think they're months in advance.
No, you have to wait in line.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we could try it. You got lucky and saw Kim Kardashian in SNL.
I did. What was the highlight of your trip?
Oh, Back to the Future, the musical. Without a question. Moulin Rouge was incredible. The set design, the lighting, the performances. Back to the Future was pretty amazing. It did things that I didn't think were possible in theater. What did you think?
I thought it was a fantastic show.
Yeah, it's a show.
Yes, that's the thing. It was a show.
Yeah, it may not be like high art or anything like that, but for what it does it very well.
I didn't find the music too memorable.
I mean, there were a couple ones. Maybe I find it memorable because I listened to them before the show.
It's probably it.
But I still think there's some good tunes in there. This one's for the Dreamers I thought was particularly good. Roger Bart was amazing as Doc Brand. Casey Lott, I think his name is, as Marty. I forgot the name of the gentleman who played George, but he was doing a perfect Crispin Glover impression. Biff was hysterical. Yeah, so all in all, it was the audience seemed to really love it.
They did.
Moulin Rouge audience was kind of tame. I'm serious. They were just kind of, they're there.
Any surprises?
Probably how Broadway wasn't how it looked. I thought it looked. I thought all the theaters were in around the same area, like together, like one after another. No, that's not the case. Some are blocks away from each other. But the Winter Garden is surprisingly, it's a small theater.
It is small. A lot of these theaters are actually quite small.
Yeah, the Winter Garden especially though, because there was no door entrance to the theater. You just walked into it.
Not.
Like you're walking into a movie auditorium. What was the biggest surprise for you? Like that I came here?
Yeah, that. And that little side trip through the countryside towards New York.
Oh, yes. Oh, Libby and Ian.
Oh, yes.
That was a huge surprise. Wonderful surprise. Lovely people. I enjoyed them. What was it called?
Coney Island.
No, not the city. The place it was.
The depot.
The depot. Excellent. The food, wonderful. Although you found it because it was too bread.
Yeah, too much bread for me.
Well, that's kind of Detroit style pizza for you. But I enjoyed it. I, was there with my best friend. Wasn't impressed with the hotel.
You mean the Aloft?
The Aloft, yes. The Phoenix was good. It's a simple hotel. Nothing fancy in it. But it's a very nice hotel. They keep it very well cleaned, and it's a pleasure to stay in.
Shame we couldn't stay longer, but...
Well, if we ever go back to D.C., let's not go in the summer.
Agreed.
Because I did not expect D.C. to be this humid and hot. What about you? Turn the camera on yourself now. All right.
Okay. So what are the questions?
Well, what was the biggest surprise for you?
Well, I already mentioned the countryside trip.
Yes, you did.
I did manage to get to the Jewish Museum. I think the biggest surprise was that it was free because, as it turned out, I went on Saturday.
Oh.
And they do not charge prices for the Sabbath.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So, biggest surprise there.
Yeah. What was your least favorite part of the trip?
The drive from Pittsburgh to Somerset.
Oh, that bad?
Well, the road was very nice, but it was dark. It was very tiring. And there are no service areas there.
Wait.
From there to Somerset when I got off. And was annoyed that when I got back on in the morning, 2 miles down the road was a service area. Not
the Phillies game.
No, I like the Philly game.
Yeah, but
what was wrong with the Phillies game?
I don't know. I didn't have much investment in it.
Okay, well, that's kind of how you do it when you visit ballparks.
But I still rooted for the Cubs, and I still rooted for the Twins.
It was a nice stadium.
Yeah, it was nice. It was a fun game to watch.
Yes. Did you like the Philly cheesesteaks?
The what?
The Philly cheesesteaks.
Oh, those were wonderful.
Yeah.
Nothing I'd have on the regular, but they were still. It was nice to experience, and especially at the first cheesesteak restaurant.
Yeah. I guess the other disappointment was that we couldn't do anything in Philly.
No, we're done.
Because there's just no parking. And the streets are narrow, and...
That was the big problem. Narrow streets. Oh, New York. That's why you dropped off the car and we took subway most of the time.
Yeah.
What would you do again?
Well, Cooperstown, the town, because there's so much to do there. It's not just the
It's
baseball.
a lovely town.
It is a lovely town. It's not just the Hall of Fame. I wanted to do 2 more museums, but you just don't have enough time.
No, there isn't.
For a day trip. I did like coming to that cheese place.
Oh, yes. That gentleman was very nice.
Very nice.
Very nice. We got some good stuff there. He was very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
We always seem to meet good cheese people. Like that lady in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Lovely.
So, any other highlights?
Oh, you were the highlight.
No.
Right. I was like seeing my best friend, Newman.
No. Well, thank you.
It's been 2 years, and that's too long.
Yes, it is. We'll have to figure out something.
We will. So, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Stadiums. I got 3 of them, so I made a major accomplishment.
So you have 2 more.
3 more.
3 more.
Yes. And I'm looking forward to the next adventure.
Yes. Hopefully soon.
Yes. Most soon.
Sooner rather than later, Newman.
Preferably. If that. All right. Signing off.